You know those kamikaze planes? The ones diving from the sky into Allied ships. Pilots screaming into steel and fire for the Emperor. Everyone knows that story. But almost nobody talks about what was happening beneath the waves. In the final year of World War II, while kamikaze aircraft dominated headlines, Japan built something arguably more horrifying. A weapon that turned men into torpedoes, locked inside with no way out, racing underwater at 30 knots toward enemy hulls. The pilots knew, every single one of them. They were not coming back. The hatch sealed behind them. This is the story of the Kaiten, the suicide submarine that killed hundreds of young Japanese men and barely scratched the Allied fleet. A weapon built on desperation and delusion that cost Japan more than it ever hurt America. 2 submarine officers sit in a cramped office at Kure Naval Arsenal, Lieutenant Hiroshi Kuroki and Lieutenant Sekio Nishina. They have blueprints spread across the table, plans for a manned torpedo. Not a new concept, but they are proposing something different. No escape mechanism. One-way trip. Pure suicide. The sketch shows a Type 93 torpedo, the famous Long Lance, modified with a cylinder for a human pilot. They have been pitching this for months. Nobody wanted to hear it. Too extreme, too brutal, even for a military that valued death before dishonor. The High Command looked at their plans and said no, not because it would not work, because it was inhumane. Prime Minister Kentaro Suzuki himself said using men in situations with no chance of survival was not proper military operation. The Japanese Navy had always opposed such undertakings, but that was before the Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 1944. Over 400 Japanese aircraft shot down in a single engagement. The Imperial Navy bleeding out in the Pacific, resources exhausted, industrial capacity collapsing, American submarines strangling supply routes. Every week brought news of another island lost, another fleet battered. Suddenly, those blueprints did not look so extreme anymore. They looked necessary. Hiroshi Suzukawa joined the team, chief technician at Kure Naval Arsenal working for Canon Camera Company. The 3 men refined the design through late 1942 and into 1943. By January 1943, they had complete plans ready. The enlarged Model 93 would be 54 feet long, warhead of 3,000 pounds, range of 40 miles at 40 knots without showing a wake. They called it Kaiten. Sky change, revolutionary alteration, moving the heavens themselves. The name was prophetic, just not in the way they hoped. Naval Institute Proceedings, January 1962 issue, which features first-hand accounts from Kaiten pilot Yutaka Yokota, who survived 3 aborted missions, and the Naval History and Heritage Command official documentation, H0394, covering the first Kaiten attack at Ulithi. These are not secondary sources repeating legends. These are primary military records and survivor testimonies that took years to uncover. Now back to the information. An electrically powered gyroscope, steering controls, ballast controls, a lever to arm the warhead, another lever to detonate manually, pressurized air bottles, sodium peroxide air filters, primitive technology that would later appear in spacecraft. The pilot sits practically on the deck, cramped, dark, smelling of oil, peroxide, seawater, and recent welding. The interior is stifling, damp. The cockpit holds enough oxygen for maybe half an hour, then the sodium peroxide filters kick in. The battery provides light to see the instrument panel. That is all you get. 1 week later, August 1st, the Imperial Japanese Navy orders 100 units. Production begins immediately. Over 300 men eventually, ages 17 to 28. Most are 21. They come from the Naval Academy, from engineering schools, from torpedo schools, flying schools, even preparatory schools. Some have been submarine crews. Some have never seen combat. All of them know what they are signing up for. This is not voluntold. This is actual volunteering. They want this mission. The training is brutal. They start in sailing boats, learning to maneuver using only periscope and instrument data. Once they master that, they climb into training Kaitens. The training models have fake warheads, emergency features that let the torpedo surface if the pilot does something dangerous. They drive laps around Otsushima, then obstacle courses, then open water tests against target ships. It is never safe. Water leaks into the pilot compartment when the mother submarine submerges. Salt water seeps into the engine, causes fires from oil leaks, causes explosions. The Kaiten is prone to uncontrollable dives, broaching, sudden impacts with the seafloor. The Kaiten is recovered. The bodies are cremated. Lieutenant Nishina takes the urn containing Kuroki's ashes and makes a vow. He will carry those ashes on the first combat mission. He will complete what they started together. 15 trainees die during the program, some from impacts during dummy runs. Even with no live warhead, the collision force is enough to kill anyone inside. Some from mechanical failures, oxygen system malfunctions, engine fires, leaks that turn the compartment into a tomb. Over 1,375 men train on Kaiten. 145 die. Most never see combat. 3 times the weight of a standard Type 93 torpedo warhead. Cruising speed 12 knots, maximum speed 30 knots, 34 miles per hour underwater. Maximum range 42 nautical miles, maximum operating depth 250 feet. But here is the problem. The submarines carrying Kaiten can only submerge to 80 meters, about 260 feet. Any deeper and the Kaiten cannot withstand the pressure. This restriction will kill multiple submarines, making them easier to detect, easier to track, easier to sink. Each has a small humped protrusion amidships, fitted with a periscope. Diving planes on the bow just behind the warhead. Some Kaiten can be accessed through tubes from inside the submarine. Others have to be boarded while the sub is surfaced. Before every mission, the pilots write letters, leave poems, give keepsakes for their families. They wear dark jumpsuits, a short ceremonial sword, a white silk hachimaki, the headband emblazoned with the rising sun, symbol of relentless determination. They pray at the submarine's small Shinto shrine. They pay respects to the captain. Then they wait. The crew enters the Kaitens through access tubes if available. If not, they board on the surface, which is louder, more dangerous, more likely to give away position. The hatch is sealed, locked from the outside. Early models had an escape mechanism. Later production models removed it. The pilots refused to use it anyway. Once inside, you're committed. The submarine signals. The wooden cradles release with clanks and bumps. The Kaiten rocks in the water. The pilot checks the periscope, activates the motor. A deep thrumming, 550 horsepower. Contra-rotating bronze propellers spin up. In moments, the Kaiten is moving at 15 knots. The pilot takes his bearing from the gyroscope and heads toward the target. The submarine commander and crew wait submerged. They cannot see what happens. They can only listen for explosions through the water. Then they guess. Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet stages here between strikes on Japanese targets. The place is jammed with American power. 2 Japanese submarines approach the reef. I-47 under Lieutenant Commander Genji Orita. I-36 nearby. Each submarine carries 4 Kaiten, 8 pilots total. This is the Kikusui Group operation, first combat deployment of the Kaiten weapon. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina is aboard I-47, one of the original designers. He is in the first Kaiten. He carries the small white wooden box containing Hiroshi Kuroki's ashes. The sun rises over the lagoon, orange light breaking across tropical water. Guided by gyroscope, heading into Lethe. Inside the lagoon, he spots the USS Mississinewa, a Cimarron-class fleet oiler, 11,316 tons, 553 feet long. Commissioned May 18, 1944, only 6 months old. She is anchored at berth, loaded with fuel for the fleet, 404,000 gallons of aviation gasoline, 9,000 barrels of diesel oil, 90,000 barrels of fuel oil, 3.78 million gallons of petroleum products sitting in one ship. Nishina adjusts course, surfaces briefly to check through the periscope. The Mississinewa is there, huge, stationary. He dives again, accelerates to maximum speed, 30 knots, rushes toward the starboard bow, impact. The aviation gasoline ignites. Secondary explosions tear through the ship. Fire spreads instantly. Flames leap 100 feet into the air. The crew tries to abandon ship. Men jump into water covered in burning fuel. The fire reaches the after magazine. Another explosion rips through Mississinewa. Fleet tugs rush in, try to extinguish the flames. It is useless. 0900 hours. The ship slowly turns over, disappears beneath the surface. 15 minutes later, the fire on the water is out. Lethe anchorage is quiet again. 63 American sailors are dead. Captain Philip G. Beck goes down with his ship. 235 crew members survive. Many are burned. All are traumatized. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina is dead. So is Hiroshi Kuroki, again. The 2 designers reunited in death at the bottom of Ulithi Lagoon. Explosions echo across the water. The submarine crew hears them, assumes multiple hits. They believe they have sunk 3 aircraft carriers and 2 battleships. I-36 launches its Kaiten. 2 are stuck in their cradles, cannot release. A 3rd develops a heavy leak in the pilot compartment. Only 1 Kaiten launches successfully. It is never heard from again. The pilot, Ensign Imanishi, is listed as sinking an aircraft carrier. He sank nothing. I-36 surfaces briefly to recover the pilot stuck in his Kaiten. 2 Avenger torpedo bombers spot them. Attack. I-36 crash dives, survives, returns to Japan like a beaten dog. Reality, 8 Kaiten launched, 8 pilots dead, 1 American oiler sunk, 63 casualties. Japanese belief, 3 carriers and 2 battleships sunk. This discrepancy will define the entire Kaiten program. Tokyo hears the exaggerated reports, orders hundreds more torpedoes built, approves expanded operations. The delusion spreads. Direct hits. I-37 implodes. All 117 officers and crew die. 4 Kaiten pilots die without ever launching. First combat casualties of the program. The submarines carrying the Kaiten prove more vulnerable than regular submarines. The 80-meter depth restriction makes them easier to track. The noise of launching Kaiten gives away position. The bulky weapons on deck create drag, slow the submarine, make maneuvering harder. 8 submarines carrying Kaiten will be sunk during the war. 846 submariners will die transporting Kaiten to targets. That is 8 times more deaths than the Kaiten will inflict on the enemy. 5 targets: Ulithi again, Manus, Guam, Hollandia, New Guinea, Castle Roads, and Palau. Admiral Somu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, personally visits the attack group. That is how seriously the High Command takes this. They believe Kaiten will change the war. The submarines slip out of Kure Naval Base. Among them is I-58 under Lieutenant Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto. He will become infamous 8 months later for sinking the cruiser USS Indianapolis. Right now he sees little value in Kaiten. He knows submarines. He knows torpedoes. The Type 95 torpedo variant they carry is devastatingly effective. 19 per submarine. Reliable, accurate, long range. Why risk everything on these cantankerous manned torpedoes? Stuck controls. Leaks. One explodes during launch, kills the pilot instantly, damages the submarine. The convoy presses on. They reach their targets, launch the remaining Kaiten. The submarines wait, submerged. Listen for explosions, hear several, assume success. Return to Japan believing they have sunk dozens of ships. Reality, according to Allied records: 3 ships hit, 11 American casualties total, 1 small infantry landing craft sunk. LCI 600, 3 men dead. The rest of the Kaiten miss completely. Some are destroyed by defensive gunfire, some malfunction and sink, some wander off course and run out of fuel. The pilots self-destruct rather than die slowly of oxygen deprivation. 1 submarine does not return. USS Conklin sinks it with its crew of 122. All dead. If you are still watching this and finding value in this documented Pacific War history with detailed casualty figures and operational failures that textbooks skip over, hit subscribe. We are only halfway through this story and it gets darker. Also, comment what city you're hearing this from. This research comes from verified U.S. Navy records, including the Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships, survivor accounts compiled in the book. I-Boat Captain by Zenji Orita and Joseph Harrington, published in 1976. An official Japanese naval records translated post-war and archived at the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo. These sources provide exact submarine designations, casualty numbers, and coordinate positions that were classified for decades. Now back to the story. Targets around Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Guam. Each mission follows the same pattern. Submarines approach, launch Kaiten, pilots die. The torpedoes miss or malfunction. The submarines get detected. American destroyer escorts and patrol craft prowl the waters. TBF Avenger torpedo bombers hunt from above. They carry Mark 24 homing torpedoes, acoustic guided. Once they lock onto a submarine, it is over. 6 more Japanese submarines go to the bottom, roughly 100 crew each, 600 more men dead. The Kaiten launches continue to abort due to technical failures. Those that do launch often get destroyed on approach. Defensive gunfire rips them apart before they reach targets. After the war, Japanese records reveal the Navy believed they sank between 30 and 50 ships with Kaiten. Allied records show 0 damage in these 5 missions. Not 1 ship, not 1 casualty, total failure. They are heading to rear areas in the Philippines for rest and reinforcement. 1 Liberty ship, USS Adria. The convoy departed Buckner Bay, Okinawa, on July 21st. 3 days out, 8 escort vessels screen the convoy. Patrol craft, submarine chasers, 1 patrol escort. Leading the screen is USS Underhill, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, D682, commissioned in Boston, late 1943. She served most of the war in the Atlantic, Caribbean, Mediterranean. Transferred to the Pacific in January 1945. Now she is part of MacArthur's Navy, the 7th Fleet. 45 minutes later, the convoy is steaming southwest. Underneath the waves, Japanese submarine I-53 under Commander Saiichi Oba tracks them. I-53 departed Otsushima on July 14th. 10 days ago, she carries 6 Kaiten Type 1 torpedoes. Oba has been stalking this convoy. The reconnaissance plane confirmed positions. Now he makes his move. He releases all 6 Kaiten. Some sources say 8. The submarines were designed to carry 4, but modifications allowed 6. Either way, multiple human torpedoes are now racing toward the convoy at 30 knots. It turns for PC-803, one of the patrol craft. The chaser evades, the Kaiten misses, circles back. Now it is heading for Underhill. The destroyer escort's sonar tracks it. Another contact surfaces, a 2nd Kaiten to port. Both torpedoes are closing. 1 to starboard, 1 to port. The starboard Kaiten is too close. None of Underhill's guns can depress enough to hit it. Lieutenant Commander Newcomb makes a decision. He orders flank speed, full rudder. All hands stand by to ram. Underhill's bow swings onto collision course with the port Kaiten. The destroyer escort accelerates, rams the torpedo, 2 explosions. The first directly under the bridge and magazine area, the second a few seconds later, forward of the bridge, more to starboard. The 3,420-pound warhead detonates. The forward boilers explode simultaneously. Ready ammunition for the 3-inch and 20mm guns detonates. Underhill breaks in half at the forward fire room. The bow section, blown nearly vertical, begins drifting to starboard. It sinks almost instantly. Everyone forward is dead. The stern section remains upright, afloat, listing, covered in oily water from the explosion. Sailors are knocked down, some are washed overboard. Others are wounded by shrapnel, burns, blast injuries. The mainmast's SL radar antenna is blown off the top. It lands near the stern, crushes one sailor to death. Later, they will each receive the Purple Heart. The survivors abandon the stern section. Small boats from the other escorts pick them up. Men spend hours in the water. The remaining American warships depth charge the area for over an hour. I-53 escapes. She makes it back to Japan 1 month later, just before the surrender. The stern section of Underhill remains afloat. Too dangerous to salvage. Too much of a hazard. The next day, July 25th, submarine chasers PC-803 and PC-804, along with escort patrol vessel PCE-872, sink the wreck with gunfire. USS Underhill disappears beneath the Philippine Sea at 19 degrees 20 minutes north, 126 degrees 42 minutes east. She is the last U.S. destroyer escort sunk in World War II. The last American warship sunk by Kaiten. 4 Kaiten pilots die in this attack. Sub-Lieutenant Jun Katsuyama, Ensign Toyuki Seki, flight petty officers, First Class Tsutoma Kawajiri, and Masahiro Arakawa. Their names are recorded in Japanese memorial records. Confirmed Allied ships sunk. 3. USS Mississinewa, fleet oiler. USS Underhill, destroyer escort. LCI 600, infantry landing craft. Total confirmed Allied deaths: 187 American servicemen, 63 on Mississinewa, 113 on Underhill. 11 across other engagements, including LCI 600. Japanese casualties: 104 Kaiten pilots killed in training and operations. 846 submariners lost when 8 mother submarines were sunk. 156 technical staff and support personnel killed. Total: 1,106 Japanese deaths. The program killed nearly 6 times as many Japanese as Americans. The effectiveness rate is catastrophic. After the war, American investigators interview surviving Japanese naval officers. They review operational records, logbooks, mission reports. The Japanese Navy believed it sank 30 to 50 Allied ships with Kaiten, carriers, battleships, cruisers, transports. In their records, they credited massive victories. Tokyo approved expanded production based on these claims. Resources were diverted, manpower allocated. Submarines that could have been hunting convoys with conventional torpedoes were instead tied up as Kaiten carriers. Type 93. Long lance torpedoes, the best in the world at the time, were torn apart and converted into manned suicide weapons. The conversions often made them less effective than the original unmanned torpedo. The Type 93 had a range of 22 miles, speed of 49 knots, warhead of 1,080 pounds, oxygen-fueled, leaving no wake, nearly invisible, devastating. The U.S. Navy did not learn its full capabilities until after the war, but Japan took these superb weapons and inserted human beings into them, made them slower to deploy, louder, more prone to failure. The submarines carrying them became targets. By 1944, Japan was losing the war badly. The industrial might of America was overwhelming. Every month brought more ships, more planes, more men. Japan's merchant fleet was being systematically destroyed by American submarines. Supply routes strangled. Raw materials could not reach factories. Fuel could not reach bases. The economy was collapsing. The military needed a miracle weapon, something that could turn the tide with minimal resources. The Kaiten seemed like that weapon. 1 man, 1 torpedo, 1 ship. Simple math. But the math was wrong because the assumptions were wrong. The Japanese believed in the superiority of spirit over material, Bushido, the warrior code, death before dishonor, sacrifice for the emperor. They believed 1 man willing to die could accomplish more than 10 men trying to live. This belief had cultural power, historical resonance, but it ignored basic physics. A manned torpedo is not more accurate than a well-engineered unmanned torpedo. The human inside cannot correct for mechanical failures, cannot compensate for seawater leaks, cannot see through the periscope if the compartment is flooding. The pilot becomes a liability, not an asset. After launching Kaiten, the mother submarine would submerge and listen. When they heard explosions, they assumed hits. But explosions mean nothing. Depth charges explode. Kaiten explode when they malfunction. Kaiten pilots manually detonate when they miss and want to die on their terms, rather than suffocate. Every boom got credited as a kill. The submarine commanders reported back, multiple targets destroyed. The brass in Tokyo had no way to verify. No reconnaissance aircraft could confirm. No follow-up intelligence. They believed because they wanted to believe. Each exaggerated report led to more production, more missions, more deaths. A feedback loop of delusion. By August 1945, over 500 Kaiten Type 10 units had been ordered. Type 10 used the Type 92 electric torpedo as a base, smaller, on only 660-pound warhead, but easier to produce. About 6 were actually completed before the surrender. The program was expanding, even as Japan was collapsing. Happy to sacrifice. The culture of death that had been built up over years of militaristic indoctrination reached its logical conclusion. These men climbed into sealed tubes knowing they would never see daylight again, knowing their families would never recover their bodies, knowing they would die alone in the dark underwater. And they did it willingly. This was not fanaticism in the abstract. This was real human beings choosing death because their society told them it was noble. The tragedy is they believed it. The greater tragedy is it accomplished almost nothing. It forced changes in American naval tactics, increased anti-aircraft defenses, changed fleet formations. The Kaiten changed nothing. 3 ships sunk in 8 months of operations. The American fleet did not alter convoy routes, did not develop specific countermeasures. The destroyer escorts and patrol craft already had depth charges and sonar, already hunted submarines. The Kaiten made the mother submarines easier to find and kill. That was the program's only strategic impact. It hurt Japan more than America. The young men had prepared psychologically for death. They had written their final letters, said their goodbyes, made peace with dying. Now what? Some refused to believe it. The culture shock is profound. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were Special Attack Unit volunteers, the most dedicated, the most indoctrinated. Suddenly their purpose is gone, their sacrifice rejected. Japan surrenders unconditionally. American forces occupy the islands. The Kaiten are scrapped. A few survive into preservation. Museums around the world, Kure Maritime Museum, Yasukuni War Memorial Museum in Tokyo, USS Bofin Submarine Museum in Pearl Harbor, United States Naval Undersea Museum in Keyport, Washington. Visitors can see the weapons, the tiny compartment, the canvas seat, the crude controls. It is hard to imagine climbing inside. Harder to imagine doing it willingly. Why did he live when his comrades died? Was he less devoted? Less worthy? These questions haunted him. He died in 1992. His testimony provides one of the few insider accounts of the program. He described the training, the camaraderie among pilots, the rituals before missions, the absolute certainty they felt about dying. He also described the mechanical problems everyone knew about but no one could fix. Water leaks, engine fires, control failures. The Kaiten was, in his words, a cantankerous weapon, fast but unstable, difficult to control, prone to uncontrollable dives and broaching. Yet they climbed in anyway. Effective, reliable, silent. He trusted them. The Kaiten, in his view, were dangerous to everyone. The pilots, the submarine, the mission. He advocated for using conventional torpedoes whenever possible. Later in his career, August 1945, he was the one who sank USS Indianapolis. Regular torpedoes, no Kaiten involved. That mission succeeded where so many Kaiten missions failed. It validated his position, but his superiors did not listen. The Kaiten program continued until surrender because the high command refused to see reality. They kept believing the exaggerated reports, kept ordering more production, kept sending submarines and pilots to their deaths. Divers found the hulk at 132 feet depth, roughly 7/10 of a mile north of Mogmog Island, Ulithi. The ship was still leaking oil. From July to August 2001, 18,000 to 24,000 gallons of fuel oil leaked into the lagoon, threatening coral reefs, sea turtle breeding grounds, local fishing waters. A typhoon hit the area. Heavy fuel oil contaminated beaches in the lagoon. The U.S. Navy had to mount a recovery operation. Between July and October 2001, they installed 20 hot taps through the hull, cut access into 2 tanks for internal tank access, removed all accessible oil from 21 tanks, the engine room, the pump room, and previously leaking piping. They transferred approximately 1.95 million gallons of oil from Mississinewa to a barge. 7% of it was free water mixed in. The operation completed ahead of schedule, but it cost money, resources, effort, all because of a weapon fired 60 years earlier. The Kaiten's legacy is still causing problems in 2025. Just another piece of steel on the Pacific floor. 113 men are still down there. The Navy lists them as non-recoverable. Their families had to accept that. No bodies to bury, no graves to visit, just names on memorial walls and casualty lists. The crew of Underhill was awarded the Navy Unit Commendation in 1998, 53 years after the attack. Recognition came late. The survivors, those 122 wounded men, scattered after the war, went home, tried to rebuild lives. Some attended reunions, kept in touch. Most tried to forget. The trauma of that day, July 24th, 1945, stayed with them. The sound of the explosion, the ship breaking apart, The water filled with oil and debris and bodies. The hours waiting for rescue. That does not go away. The families of the Kaiten pilots have their own trauma. In Japan, the pilots are remembered as heroes. Otsushima has the Kaiten Memorial Museum. Portraits of the pilots, their letters, uniforms, personal effects. Ages 18 to 20. The exhibits are in Japanese and English. Annual memorial services are somber. Families attend, aging survivors, historians. They remember, they question. How did a nation convince its young men to die in such a futile way? 156 families lost fathers, sons, brothers for a weapon that barely worked. What Japan gained? 187 Allied dead. 3 ships sunk. 0 strategic impact. The exchange rate is catastrophic. For every American killed, Japan lost 6 of its own people. For every ship sunk, Japan lost 2 to 3 submarines. The program was worse than ineffective. It was actively harmful. Yet it continued until the surrender, because no one in the chain of command would admit failure. Admitting failure would mean admitting those young men died for nothing. That was unacceptable in the culture of Imperial Japan. So more missions launched, more pilots died, more submarines sank, and the delusion fed itself, each with 1,080-pound warhead, 22-mile range, 49 knot speed, oxygen-fueled, no wake, extremely difficult to detect, operated by trained submariners with years of experience. If those 8 submarines had conducted normal patrols, how many Allied ships could they have sunk? The strategic waste is staggering. Those submarines could have been hitting supply lines. Instead, they became coffins for over 800 men. The psychological warfare aspect failed. Japan hoped Kaiten would terrify American sailors. The opposite happened. After Mississinewa, Allied forces at Ulithi went on high alert. Depth charges saturated the lagoon. Sonar patrols increased. Anti-submarine nets reinforced. The second Kaiten attack achieved nothing. The attacks created resolve, not terror. American sailors got angry, wanted revenge. The loss of Underhill was tragic, but did not break morale. The convoy continued. The Navy analyzed the attack, improved countermeasures. That is the American way of war. Learn, adapt, improve. Japan never learned from Kaiten failures, never adapted tactics, just kept repeating the same mistakes until the war ended. In Japan, debates about the program remain sensitive. Some view the pilots as tragic victims of militarism, young men brainwashed into throwing away their lives. Others view them as heroes who sacrificed for a just cause. Both perspectives have problems. The pilots were not brainwashed robots. They made choices, however constrained by culture and propaganda. But they were not heroes either. They died for nothing, killed a handful of enemies, accomplished no strategic goals, failed to save Japan from defeat. The truth is uncomfortable. These were young men who wanted to matter, wanted their deaths to mean something, and they did not. The weapon they piloted was flawed. The strategy behind it was delusional. The leadership that approved it was desperate and incompetent. They died in the dark underwater for a cause already lost. That is the real tragedy. In America, the Kaiten are footnotes. Most people have never heard of them. Everyone knows kamikaze planes. But human torpedoes? Unknown. USS Mississinewa has a memorial website maintained by survivors' families. 63 names listed, each with a biography. The youngest was 19. USS Underhill has a similar memorial. The 113 dead are listed, their sacrifice honored, but the weapon that killed them is barely mentioned. Modern militaries study the Kaiten as a cautionary tale, how desperation leads to bad tactics, how cultural factors override strategic thinking, how poor intelligence feedback creates delusional decision-making. The lessons seem obvious now, but in 1944, facing annihilation, Japan convinced itself otherwise. The Kaiten became a symbol of everything wrong with the Japanese war effort, throwing lives away on desperate measures, believing exaggerated reports while ignoring reality, valuing death over effectiveness. Dozens of missions failed due to mechanical problems, countless near misses and total misses, a success rate so low it would be laughable if it were not so tragic. Japan invested enormous resources, precious steel, fuel, oxygen, explosives, submarines, trained submariners, all for almost nothing. The Type 93 torpedoes that were converted into Kaiten could have sunk dozens of ships if left as conventional weapons. Instead, they killed hundreds of young Japanese men and a handful of Americans. The arithmetic is damning. One of the others launched from I-47 that day in November 1944. It never reached a target. It ran out of fuel and sank. The pilot inside, one of the 7 whose names are known from the mission, died slowly. Oxygen exhaustion. Alone in the dark at the bottom of Ulithi Lagoon. That is how most Kaiten pilots died. Not in glorious explosions, not taking enemy ships down with them, just alone in a broken machine, waiting for the air to run out. That is the true story of the Kaiten. Not heaven shakers, not divine weapons, just steel coffins for desperate young men in a war already lost. A few miles away, scattered on the seabed, the remains of other Kaiten, other pilots, All of them dead before they turned 25. All of them believing their deaths would matter. All of them wrong. That is the lesson. Not that courage is meaningless, not that sacrifice is worthless, but that leaders who ask for sacrifice better make sure it accomplishes something. The Kaiten program failed that test completely. 1,106 Japanese dead, 187 Americans, 3 ships, 8 submarines, 0 strategic impact. The numbers do not lie. The war ended the same way it would have ended if Kaiten had never been built, but over 1,000 more people would be alive. That is the cost of delusion. That is the price of desperation. That is what happens when a military values death more than effectiveness. Remember that. The next time someone talks about special weapons and spirit and determination conquering all, ask about the Kaiten, ask about the numbers, ask what was actually accomplished, then ask if it was worth it. The answer is written at the bottom of Ulithi Lagoon in twisted steel and bones.